Hello?
Like, it's not going on. And I thought it was because there's a tech guy who's gonna...
There should be, yes. Let me fix that.
Hi, everybody. We're going to be starting right about now, so if you could settle into your seats, please, that would be appreciated. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the High Level Intergenerational Dialogue, Take the Hot Seat. My name is Natalia, and I will be one of your co-moderators today. As a girl advocate with the Working Group on Girls, I am passionate about bringing girls' voices and rights to the forefront of international platforms such as the United Nations. Seated along such inspirational women and global leaders like yourselves, I look forward to putting each of you in the hot seat and learning how each of you plan to support the needs of youth from around the world.
Hello, everybody. My name is Olaoluwa Bagun, and I'm from the Commonwealth Youth Gender Equality Network. I'm also excited to be here at this intergenerational dialogue, and I would also be one of your co-moderators. Today's business is basically that we're here to ensure that our voices as young people are at the center of conversations where our policymakers and our decision makers are involved. The youth dialogue has been conducted for the past 3 years, but this year is the only time that we've actually decided to ask our policymakers to make tangible commitments, take from them tangible commitments at CSW. And a task team that comprised of more than 12 youth-led and youth-serving organizations met in October 2018, and they've started planning for the engagement and meaningful participation of young people from then. They've held over 70 meetings, conducted several physical focus group discussions in more than 15 countries, and they've also used social media to ensure that we have diverse voices in the development of the common minimum standards. So what this means is that the voices of young people who cannot be at CSW for whatever reason are also incorporated in the common minimum standards.
The common minimum standards were finalized this past weekend at the pre-CSW youth event, where young women and girls convened to discuss the changes we want to see at the United Nations. This document, written by youth themselves, addresses how social protection systems, public services, and sustainable infrastructure can better meet the needs of young people. Through recognizing the importance of including young people in the design, implementation, and evaluation of all policy and strategy decisions, the common minimum standards aim to advance gender equality so that no one is left behind. As we move through our dialogue today, we urge our panelists to consider the common minimum standards as they make their commitments.
Before we put our decision makers in the hot seat, it would be great to know who we have here. All protocols observed. We have Her Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of Colombia, Ms. Marta Lucia Ramirez. We also have with us Her Excellency, Ms. Nadine Gasman, Head of the National Institute for Women, Mexico. Again, we have Her Excellency, Ms. Adriana Salvatierra, President of the Senate in Bolivia. We also have the Executive Director of UN Women, Madam Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Again, we have our United Nations Secretary General Envoy on Youth, Ms. Jayathma Wickramanayake. We also have the Deputy Executive Director of UNAIDS, Ms. Gunilla Carlsson, and the Chair of CSW 63 and Permanent Representative of Ireland to the United Nations, Her Excellency, Ms. Geraldine Byrne Nason.
Thank you again to each of our panelists for joining us today. Our agenda for today will be as follows. Each panelist will be put in the hot seat as they answer questions from both myself, Ola, and a few young leaders who participated in the youth dialogue. Afterwards, we will then open the floor to questions and give the audience an opportunity to put the panelists in the hot seat themselves. As a reminder for our panelists, we have a timekeeper who will be helping us stay on track throughout our dialogue.
This is the moment we've been waiting for. The seats are piping hot, and we are ready to go. Now, Your Excellency, Ms. Marta Lucia Ramirez, you are now in the hot seat.
Bueno, muy buenos días. Me alegra muchísimo.
Your Excellency, you've heard it all from all the young people who are bold. You've heard their authentic voices. And as leaders of today and now, not tomorrow, we have set these minimum standards, and we want to ensure that our unique needs do not fall through the cracks. We want to ensure that social protection, public services, and sustainable infrastructure actually take our needs into consideration. So in your inspiring role as Vice President, we would like to know how you model leadership to ensure that the voices of young people are amplified.
Bueno, muy buenos.
Very good morning. I'm so pleased to be here at this panel with youth from around the world, from different cultures, but with a single aspiration, which is to have a better world when in your future. Over here, we're in the hot seat. I live in the hot seat, making policies in Colombia. In my case, I am not a politician. I don't have that background, or I don't come from a political family. I am an attorney, but I started working when I was very young, when I was 18 years old. halfway through my career as a attorney, I started working part-time, and I've always been very sensitive to the aspirations of the youth, but especially because youth needs someone to give them an opportunity. I was lucky to have someone to give me an opportunity when I was 18, and from then on, I was able to develop my professional career. Luckily, I had a very successful career in the private sector, in the financial sector, and now I'm a civil servant. I was a minister of foreign trade. I was the first female foreign trade of Colombia, the first female minister of defense. I was a senator, and now I'm the first vice president of Colombia. This first time collection, we can never perceive it as something, as a vanity or ego. This happened because someone gave us an opportunity, because someone gave us a hand to open up opportunities and spaces. And being the first one, in my case, means having the responsibility, a tremendous responsibility, to meet the expectations of Colombian women, but also the Colombian youth. And why Colombian youth? Because I have always worked with very young people. It was actually easier to work with youth in the public sector rather than in the private sector. The private sector sometimes has a lot more restrictions, and the commitment today is to work from the vice presidency to open up spaces so we can have a very inclusive country with the youth, with women, for all the citizens from all regions. We have a government that is very committed to including all regions. Youth means commitment, giving them access to a quality education. At the moment, I am fighting because through digital education, we're able to offer higher education, technical education to all the youth in Colombia. This digital education is able to provide this. Secondly, promote entrepreneurship, supporting them through the chambers of commerce. So this entrepreneurship of youth can be scalable, can be profitable. Thirdly, support youth when it comes to participating in politics. I have participated in two campaigns. Both of them were independent, against the political class, and both of them, my campaign groups were composed by youth. The chief of my campaign in my previous campaign was 26 years old at that time. So having reached here, thanks to the work of the youth, my commitment is to work day after day to guarantee that education and this entrepreneurship, their participation in politics, because the leadership of the youth has to happen today. You are not part of the future. You are the present, because it is in the present where we are building the world's future. That means that you need to participate. You need to make your voices heard. But this participation always have to be constructive, proposing ideas. It's very easy to be critical, to criticize, to be spectators and criticize what others are doing wrong. It's important to participate so we can all together transform our realities. Whether we're talking about developed countries or developing countries like mine, the youth always has the opportunity to transform that reality, and that is my invitation. Women cannot be left aside. We need to work shoulder to shoulder with men. We should never be left behind, but we do not want men behind either. We want to be treated, and we want to act on equal footing with men, because today's challenge for humanity are huge. You will experience and witness an even bigger transformation when it comes to biotechnology, infotechnology. All that brings new challenges, because it is transforming not only the way we communicate with each other, but also how we are social beings. And this should be taken as an opportunity so you can build a better social capital for your countries and build networks of support, regardless of where you are in the world. Youth can support each other. And I would like to conclude by saying it's very easy to be in the skeptical seat, in the critic seat. As Mary Robinson was saying, that as the chair of this conference, the Irish ambassador was saying, it's always very important to have a glass of water, even if the level is very low. Even if we have a little bit of water, we're able to quench that thirst, and we need to continue on this very, very long journey. Your journey is very long, and you will always find full glasses of water, half full, and you should be able to make the most of those resources for your families and for yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. We look forward to following your work with young people in Colombia.
Now, Your Excellency, Ms. Nadine Gasman, it is your turn in the hot seat. As a girl, I've often found it difficult to find my own voice recognized in policy discussions, mostly because of how women's rights and girls' rights tend to be conflated. To improve addressing more girl-specific needs, how is your government creating spaces for young people to speak out and be heard on the issues and policies that affect them?
Well, very good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to be sitting in the hot seat. It's a challenge, although it is a nice challenge, because I'm in a room full of young people, particularly young women from the whole world, who are asking us direct questions about what we're going to do, what are we doing, and what our governments are doing. I'd like to congratulate you for the developing of this event, the participation of all these young women at the CSW, for proposing these common standards. I believe these provide an opportunity to move forward in the building of participation of young women. It also creates opportunities, as the government of Mexico is doing currently. I was recently named the president of the National Institute of Women. So I have started to work with the government of President Manuel López Obrador, who has proposed a substantial transformation to Mexican people in society. The subject of youth is essential and central. All the transformation that we're looking for is looking towards the future, and it needs to include voices and participation and the energy of young women and men, and especially young women, because they are the ones that are and will be transforming the country. Things that are being done, and that I'd like to mention, is that we are generating opportunity. How do we generate real opportunities for young women through the strengthening of the care systems? We create an opportunity for women to go out and work, go out and study, go out and have fun, or do nothing if they prefer, because I think leisure time is important for women as well. We will be developing, and we are working with UN Women for the last few years to have a strategy that will lead to a care policy which will be in regards to the rights of the care providers and those who are cared for. We have a program for young people building a future. It's targeted for young people who are not studying and are not working. In terms of women, that's always questionable, because many women do not study but do not have a formal job because they have to care for someone. The program is targeted to these people. It will help these young women. And we will have to work on the prevention of teenage pregnancy, to work so that women can fully enjoy their sexual and reproductive rights. These are some of the strategies that we're working on in the Mexican government now. We creating spaces for consultations and dialogue with young people. And the National Institute for Women has the vision of transforming and creating policies, developing programs, having the social participation, particularly of women, indigenous women, Afro-Mexican women, women with sexual diversity. We concern and care so that women in their Mexicans women full diversity will be reflected in the work that we're doing and that we will continue to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing how these youth perspectives impact Mexico.
Your Excellency, Ms. Adriana Salvatierra, you are now in the hot seat. We understand that you're the youngest person to become the president of the Senate in Bolivia, and this is so inspiring. It gives us so much hope as young people that anything is possible. And I'm sure there are lots of young people in the room who want to run for political office. Can I see your hands? Woohoo! So now, let's hear from one of our young leaders now.
My name is YWCA of Japan. How can you use your position as a parliamentarian and young women to promote the common minimum standards and the right of girls and young women in your country?
How many time? 5 minutes. Oh, thank you. No, preguntaba el tiempo. Bueno,
no, I was asking how much time do I have. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me here. I'm delighted to be here, especially at this panel. I took the presidency of the Senate when I was 29 years old, and this is one of the youngest people. I'm one of the youngest people who have ever taken this responsibility. I kind of differ a little bit from what was said previously because of our own experience and what this has meant in Bolivia to have equal conditions for young people in order to build public policy. This isn't just an ideology, it's a matter of time. Let's see. Since 1825 until 1952, from the time we were independent until women were able to vote, we had a 127-year period. From 1952 till 1999, we were able to finally implement quotas, and when we finally added parity in our constitution, 57 years went by. What does this show us? It shows us that when we reached 2014, 51% of the parity assembly showed us that, of course, it's the struggle of women, but also political will by the politician, by the states, and that materializes in a process of a building of public policies and generation of standards that promote inclusion. In Bolivia, and particularly in terms of women and young people, we added the principle of alternance and parity, and this is why our assembly has gender equality, because also the deliberation bodies, the national, municipal, and assemblies in general, from the time you're 18, once you are able to vote, you can vote and can be voted in. You can be chosen, and this is how I was able to take the presidency of the Senate at 29, because my country understands that to build human rights, the progressive movement of this progress is a political decision, and a political decision is also an ideology. Also, and going back to the first question, how are we able to speak about youth from the state? I think it's the young people that need to speak about the possibility of building public policies, the ability to represent themselves, and essentially the possibility of being able to continue to transform the state under an ideology that allows and it has a comprehensive principle in all planning of political policy, inclusion. Who debates on behalf of the youth? We have Law 342 in Bolivia. There is a national law for youth, and the law establishes mechanisms guaranteeing the exercise of the young people's rights, gives you guarantee of mechanisms so that young people can discuss their own problems at different government levels in the municipalities, because each municipality in Bolivia, and most of them already, we have, I think, maybe 15% or 20% left to do. We've got political youth councils, young people that debate in these municipalities. Then this comes up to the departments. We also have the Departmental Council of Youth, and the last is the Plurinational Council of Youth, and that's where all the building of public policies are gathered. We do have a system designed so that we can build public policies democratically that approach the right to participation, that promotes a generation of new leaders, and that fundamentally achieves what we're discussing. Basic services. We have a universal health system that guarantees free health care, and also in some other cases guarantees the basic services, housing, and conditions to have a decent life, which is what we're working on in the plurinational state of Bolivia with gender perspective. One other thing, because the political constitution of the state allows you to choose and vote and be voted for from the time you're 18, 13% of the National Legislative Assembly came in when they were under 21, which is essential for us as well.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now, Madam Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, you may now take the hot seat. You are such a strong champion for young women and girls' rights, and I listened to you speak last year about the resilience of patriarchy and how all of us need to work together regardless of our gender so that we can even be more resilient than patriarchy. You've also continued to create spaces and opportunities for us as young people to be able to engage during CSW, and we are committed to engaging meaningfully. Now, let's hear from Sarah Anna.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Anna. I'm from the World Association of Girl Guides and Girl Scouts. And the 25th anniversary of Beijing is upcoming, and UN Women has mentioned that you envision youth leading the way forward on implementation of Beijing and the fight for gender equality. How will UN Women incorporate the common minimum standards into your work? And what other concrete steps will UN Women take to ensure leadership of girls and young women towards gender equality by 2030? Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start by saying, young people, oyez! Young people, oyez! I'm not feeling you. Young people, oyez! Young people, oyez! That's what I'm talking about. 25 years of implementing the Beijing platform and the celebration of this important anniversary will be about young people. And I am so excited because 2 countries have said we are going to be behind civil society, behind the women of the world, behind young people to celebrate this important event. And these 2 countries are Mexico and France, and I just want to invite 2 young people from these countries. I actually need you to look excited.
Okay, I can do it, don't worry.
So 3 young people from Mexico and France are a symbol of the excitement of these 2 countries who are also dedicated to making this a youthful occasion. So I just want you to know, just right from the start, we're starting with young people. Young people, oh yeah! Young people, oh yeah! we have that. How will we make sure that this event will be about young people? As you can see today, there is so many of you in the room. It was not always like this at CSW. We have been building every CSW, the constituency of young people, preparing for the day and beyond. So when we celebrate 20 years, my commitment to you is that you will be there. You will be there in even larger numbers. You will speak for yourselves. You will tell us what you want and the future you want. But starting from now, you need to start preparing to consolidate your voices so that when you come here, you have ideas that are thought through. Because those of you who are 25 and below today are the ones that will be sitting here, that will be in the plenary, that will be sitting in her seat when we reach 2030, at which point we should have delivered substantive equality. So 2020, we are positioning you as the present and the future. But you've got homework because you've got to organize, you've got to look at the mistakes we've made, as well as the steps that we've taken that are positive. You need to stand on our shoulders so that from here, you're going to springboard and take us to 2030. So, young people, oh yeah! Oh yeah. 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 Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Phumzile. So much energy from you. We're excited about this clear prioritization of young people's meaningful participation. And we just want to say that we want our leadership and agency recognized within the UN Women's Advocacy efforts. And as our ally, we will continue to push for accountability. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Jayathma Wickramanayake, it is your turn to be in the hot seat. As a youth delegate, co-founder of #Generation, and now the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, it is incredibly inspiring to see how you have impacted so many lives. In fact, one of our youth leaders, Geraldine, has a question about your work. Geraldine?
Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Geraldine Utim. I'm from South Sudan. And I have a question. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. So I have a question. So if you can recall, you can see, I'm not a young woman. I've had some years going on, but I do have a question. How can you make sure and ensure that women like myself who have a disability, when we go to China, in different countries, we're separated? And how do we make sure that we are going to be integrated? So for that time in China, I want to make sure everyone's going to be included. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As introduced, my name is Jayathma, and I am the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. But I just want to ask from Phumzile if she would like to exchange jobs with me. I certainly feel like she's more youthful than I am. So if you're up for it, let me know. But however, jokes aside, it's such a pleasure to be here, to be with all of you, to sit in a room full of people from my generation and from the generation after me. Because as Phumzile said, it's not a usual scenario here at the UN. Thank you also, Geraldine, for the very good work that you do in your country and also globally as an advocate. Thank you for bringing the concerns, needs, and priorities of the most marginalized, most vulnerable young people to the discussions, not only at the UN, but at all levels that you continue to fight for. I'll try to be short so that we can allow more time for the questions and answers, but as an answer to your question directly, last September, the UN Secretary General for the first time launched a youth strategy for the United Nations. We call this Youth 2030, so basically building up on the values, principles of Agenda 2030 for sustainable development and integrating young people, youth perspectives, needs and rights into Agenda 2030 through Youth 2030. So for an example, the Youth CSW, this event that we are having here, are the meaningful ways that we want to engage not just for you, but also with you in the course of achieving youth empowerment, fulfillment of youth potential in our road to 2030. And when we talk about youth, and I often refer to youth, young people as a term, and most often this gets identified as an abstract concept, or that youth is a homogeneous group. And most oftenly, when you say youth, it's very easy to imagine a group of young men as youth, because when you talk about youth violence or youth issues, you automatically imagine a group of young men. But we all know that youth or young people are not a homogeneous group, is a microsome of society. We are as heterogeneous as anything could be. And in this spectrum, young women and girls face extra layers of barriers. That is not just because of our age, because we still tend to live in an ageist society where, your expertise or your experience is measured on the number of years you've done a certain job or the number of years you've lived on this planet. But we all know as times change, as we evolve, that it's not true. We are experts of our own lives. Young women and girls are experts of their own lived realities. And then young women and girls who are living with disabilities, young women and girls from religious minorities, ethnic minorities, from minority castes in some places in the world, receive these challenges in multiplied manner. So I think as two main answers to your question, I think we need to have targeted investments and targeted interventions to make sure that those young people who are the most marginalized, most vulnerable, are represented in policy-making, decision-making platforms, that they are involved in the implementation and monitoring and review of global to local platforms, policies, and frameworks. And when I talk about the inclusion, especially the inclusion of the most marginalized and the most vulnerable, I often get the question that inclusion is expensive. Oh, that means you have to fly someone from Fiji or Samoa to New York. That's expensive. Or that means you have to provide additional language, translation services. That is expensive. Or that means we have to make our table bigger and allow more space. That is so expensive. And my answer to that is, let it be expensive, but that is an investment that we have to make. If there's no seat at the table... And I very deeply believe that if there's no space at the table, then we have to make our tables bigger and move our chairs and create space so those voices that were not heard before can be heard now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. But since you are the UN Envoy on Youth, we're going to keep you in the hot seat just a little bit longer. So, considering your huge following on social media, as well as your strong background in youth mobilization activism, how will you, as the UN's Envoy on Youth, use your social media platforms to promote the common minimum standards?
Thanks, Nathalie. So now, if you don't follow my social media accounts, you might think I'm as popular as Beyonce. I'm not. So if you don't follow us already, please follow. We can always use more followers. But yeah, thank you for that question. I think social media is an extremely powerful tool that we can use not only to raise awareness and for advocacy, but also to hold our policymakers accountable. right? You can just through a tweet that you send to your president or the prime minister or the minister, you can hold them accountable. You can ask them the right questions. So I think social media definitely is a very powerful tool. So you asked about my commitment. I will continue to use the platforms that I have in the UN, social media, but also mainstream media, and other opportunities to create awareness on the common minimum standards that we developed, but also keep advocating on the common minimum standards and their integration of the work that we do within CSW, but also beyond. And I think more young people know about these standards, the better, and the better support that we will have. And I think not just using the platforms and saying anything, but the message that we are saying on those platforms is also important. And I think that message should be about rights, the right to social protection, and the right for safe public civic spaces. We should not be promoting these messages as a means of welfare or as a handing out to young people. We should be, the messaging that we promote should be on the rights-based perspective. And I also think that, and when I read the final version of the Common Minimum Standards, under the infrastructure, under the sustainable infrastructure piece, you yourself advocated for the democratization of technology and democratization of internet, because we know that in the last 2 years, the internet gender gap grew by 2%. That means there are women and girls in the world who do not have access to technology and internet in the developing countries. So we should also make sure that this message reaches them. So we should continue to advocate, raise awareness, not just on social media, not just on the internet, but also using radio and TV and newspapers and any means possible. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jayathma. We look forward to seeing the implementation of your Youth 2030 strategy and the following commitments you just stated.
So how hot has the hot seat been? This way for hotter or less hot? Let me see your hands. How hot? Should we make it hotter? Hotter? All right. So now Ms. Gunilla is going to be in the hot seat. Ms. Gunilla, you have been a champion for the rights of adolescent girls and young women living with HIV. And our common minimum standards emphasize the importance of youth inclusion at every level. So now let's hear from Ritu.
Thank you so much, and for giving me... Oh, sorry.
Ritu Jain from Restless Development India. Globally, it has been estimated in 2016 that more than 2.4 million adolescent girls and young women are living with HIV. And that constitutes somewhere 60% of the whole population. So my question here is, how is UNAIDS going to collaborate with young women and adolescents to better develop policies and guidelines that affect them and have a positive future?
Thank you so much for that question, and thanks for putting UNAIDS at the hot seat. We are used to be at the hot seat because we are there to address questions around sexuality, access to comprehensive knowledge about what rights and opportunities are there for young people, but equally also to discuss the situations of stigma and discrimination for many of those that are not able to come here. People that are living in poverty face multiple risks of having discrimination and vulnerability. And I'm talking about teenage girls at high risks of living with HIV, with people living with disabilities, violence survivors, child brides, pregnant teenagers, young mothers, and young widowers, or young people belonging to stigmatized groups such as LGBTQI, among others, whose sexual and reproductive rights are denied and trampled. And we have to talk about that as well when we talk about social protection and to figuring out how can we help a next generation not to repeat the mistakes done and also the risks for a new generation to acquire a virus like HIV or other STIs that might hamper the opportunities for the future. We know that there is so much to do for prevention. And the best way to make this happen is really to have a better youth engagement in all aspects. That's why I really like to be here today, because you spoke not only about empowering ourselves and to meet like this, we also talked about how do we make things happen. So our commitment from UNAIDS is to think about this when it comes to design. One example when it is about design, in 2016, when we have the high-level meeting of ending AIDS, we really decided that we have to work with U-Proof, and that is to really ask young people what are the root causes and the risks and challenges when it comes to harmful norms and policies that we needed to address, to understand the right design of what we are doing. But equally important is to follow the implementation about what we agree upon. And to strengthen the accountability to young people, UNAIDS has changed how we track national AIDS responses. We have added new indicators on age or consent for HIV testing and treatment, on comprehensive sexuality education, and on youth participation. But you also mentioned earlier today the monitoring. And we, UNAIDS, are one of the few UN entities that systematically are monitoring youth participation at national levels. The first result we published last year, and this is providing how we can see that young people are involved when it comes to have inputs to the national HIV plans, but not so much in the decision-making about resources. And we have to change that. So how do we do that? Yeah, for us, it is to continue to make sure that we talk about access to rights and services for all, and that we dare to speak up when we are not delivering, and that we can address not only when we see stigma and discrimination, but also when we see where people don't dare to talk about sexuality. This is a promise to the next generation and to many of these young girls, women that are living without having access to rights and services. And I think that's also a preconditioning for having a full life. For you that are here today, you are the first SDG generation, and I count on you to make sure that you dare to be brave, not only for yourself and for having access to active involvement, but also to speak out for those that might not be heard or seen. People that are living without having access to rights, that are discriminated or being stigmatized. I think we owe it not only to the United Nations and the Agenda 2030, but also to make sure that you are the generation that can make sure that we are leaving no one behind. And that's why we have to fight against stigma and discrimination, and to make sure that we develop together. So thank you so much for having this opportunity, and good luck to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Gunilla. Now, Madam Chair, Ms. Geraldine Byrne Nason, you're now in the hot seat. And sitting close to you, I can feel the heat. So you've listened to all the questions that young people have been asking. And one thing is clear, we want action. You know, we want, beyond words and beyond commitment and a seat at the table, we want to be in the game. We want to be at the center of the game, here at CSW and beyond. So we have one of our young leaders, Zulika, who would like to ask you a question. Zulika?
I'm Zulika Frost from the National Alliance of Women's Organisations. I held consultations in the UK and contributed to the development of these common minimum standards. I can go back and advocate with my government, but how will you, as the chair of CSW, promote the minimum standards during the deliberations of CSW and ensure that young, diverse voices are reflected throughout this process?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Hot seat is something, as an Irish woman, I can tell you it's emanating Irish spirit that you feel rather than that you've turned up the hot seat. I'm delighted to be here. It's not the first time. Thank you for the question. It's not the first time I'm being asked. You, moderator, said to us at the beginning, how can we make tangible commitments? So on Saturday, along with Lopa and Phumzile and others, I was with the pre-CSW Youth Dialogue. And on Saturday, I already undertook a commitment, and guess what? I've delivered on it already. So before today, in fact, I've done it 3 times. So I promised that in my introductory remarks as the chair of the CSW that I would speak to the common minimum standards and that I would ask governments not just to read them, but to heed them. And I did that. And I've had a lot of delegations from the government members come up to me and remark on that. It's the first time they've heard it. And so they're all looking to see where can they look at the common minimum standards and listen. Yeah. Yesterday, I raised it again in that really extraordinary meeting that the President of the General Assembly had with Women in Power, and we have Women in Power right beside me here. All the speakers on the panel were engaged yesterday in that event, and I also raised it at a lunch event. So the common minimum standards have registered, but I absolutely get it that that's not enough. I want to say at the top that I think it's not just that they exist that's important, but that you have invested in shaping them that really makes the difference. I know that you had months of dialogue, that there was a tweetathon over 3 days, over 90 countries engaged. You know, that actually makes a difference because it gives muscle and weight to your message. And I think when people look around this room today and realize that there's that much investment, there's really no choice. I mean, I'm happy to say to my fellow governments, what part of this message don't you get, that young people are now on the move and that we need to listen. I know I'm being told time is very short here. I'll make 3 other points. The first is that Gunilla just said, be brave. I can't emphasize that enough. Your right is the right to challenge. You do that in the common minimum standards, and I'm getting that message as chair. But more importantly, you have a duty now. In the introduction, you said you'll go back to your government. You need to be talking to your governments now in 15 and 20 minutes before the negotiations get underway. Bring the common minimum standards to them. Call them up, tweet them, follow them. They're here in the building. Let them know what you think. I'll isolate 2 aspects that I think you need to underline with them. The first, at the heart of it, is education. Education for girls can open just about every other door in this big, complicated debate we're having about rights for women. We need the right kind of education. You need the right kind of transport. Who would have thought we'd have driverless cars before we have toilets and the capacity for girls to wash their hands at school? It's just not acceptable. You need to get that message across politically. The second thing that's really important that you've underlined in your common minimum standards is climate change. Very frankly, it's the existential issue. If we don't fix that, no matter how many buses to schools we have, no matter how many wonderful sanitation facilities we have, we will all be redundant, and there won't be someone sitting in my place here in 2030 because I think the challenges are just extraordinary. So I always say, by way of finishing up, I always say when women and girls get involved, the job starts getting done. Your voice is your power. I'm going to finish with 1 line that you're maybe tired of listening to this week, but it's so important. It's from an Irish poet, Evan Boland, and she says, "Our future will become the past of other women. Girls, you are those women." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Hearing each of you speak on how you plan to prioritize the rights of youth and of the girl child specifically have been incredibly inspiring. Girls like myself simply want to be included in these sorts of discussions because we want our voices to be heard. We are the experts of our own experience, and if we can't be in the room to express it ourselves, these sorts of conversations ensure that our needs are still addressed. We will now take about 3 questions from the audience. If chosen, please state your name, your organization, and country before you ask your question. Make sure to keep your questions tweetable, and let us know in the beginning to whom your question is directed. Okay.
Hi, my name is Divya Ganesan, and I'm from Girls Learn International.
And I was wondering, I'm a 16-year-old, and I was wondering yesterday, we heard from the United Nations Secretary General about the importance of addressing gender-based violence. And I'm wondering how you all are trying to focus on school-based gender-based violence for girls and the way that that's hindering our ability to pursue higher education and education in that sense. Thank you.
Don't worry, sit down. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your speeches. They were very inspiring. I'm Mervyn Azeta from Nigeria. And my question is related to the question I asked on Saturday. I was at that meeting. And I wanted to find out how best we could get those minimum standards shared with everyone. Up to today, we still do not have it, right? So how are we going to get those standards shared with us? There are quite a number of people here who do not have it, who were not in that meeting. So it'd be great to have a background of what we're discussing today. So please share it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monica Nirola from Nepal. I'm associated with Women Lead Nepal. And my question is to any one of the women in power. When we are talking about young people running for office and not just being there as a token of youth engagement, I think one of the very important barriers that we need to take into consideration is the money factor, because we need money to run for campaigns. In a country like mine, you actually need money to buy votes as well. So my question is, what can you, being the people in power, do to ensure that young people have access to money so they can run for political office, and we can overcome one of the major barriers that continues to negatively impact youth's political participation?
Thank you. Those are all the three questions we'll be taking for now. So would any of our panelists like to respond?
I will respond to the question on ending violence against women for students. UN Women is working in the context of he for she with universities around the world. We've developed 10 critical points that each university and any learning institution, for that matter, can use as a guideline. I will not take the time to explain them, but they are on our website. And we would love to work with your ministers or whoever is responsible for higher education, because we would like them to be institutionalized in every country so that they become the minimum standards that every learning institution adopts and use in order to prevent, prosecute if needed be, and protect the girls and boys where it's applicable, and also making sure that women and girls of all sexualities are actually safe. Thank you.
I might just say a quick word to the very clever but very opposite question of our Nepalese delegate about money and elections. I mean, it's fundamentally an issue that concerns all of us. But I wanted just to say that an example of what's happening in my own country is that the politicians remarkably have linked the idea of money and your capacity to be elected in the kind of flip side way. So in other words, what they've said is that there will be a penalty, financial penalty, for political parties that don't put up a 50-50 slate of women. They're not insisting that you elect 50% of women, because that's, you know, the democratic choice remains. but that if parties don't actually put women's names on the list, they're penalised financially. You'd be amazed how fast the lists became 50-50. You'd be amazed. There's a second dimension to it, which is from the public money. So this is where the point comes in to your question. From public money, we are assisting a group called Women for Election, who are working particularly with younger women to get younger women elected in the first instance to local government. Because once you get your foot in local government, it's easier then to move on to a national platform, and funding tends to follow once you've had a little bit of electoral experience. It may not be the panacea for all ills, but it does go to the point that you make, that money and elections, although we all believe it shouldn't be linked, you have to recognise in some systems it is. The European Union has ways of funding groups who build young women's capacity to step up into electoral framework. So I'd advise all of you to take a little look at that. But there are important links, and there are ways of helping.
I'd like to take the question on politics as well. I think the question on common minimum standards, the ambassador already spoke about how she was making awareness in the member states, and we also made commitments in our capacities as to how we will take the common minimum standards forward. But obviously, your point is well taken that it should be more publicly available. But on the point on the politics, I think it's extremely important in all our conversations with young people, either it pertains to prevention of violent extremism or peace building or employment or labor force participation or participating in elections, there's this common understanding that young people are lazy, they don't want to go out and vote, they're not socially, politically active. But then what young people are telling us is they don't believe in politics because politics is corrupt, and they don't believe in their governments and institutions anymore, and there's this huge lack of mistrust between young people and the politicians and young people and political institutions. So I do agree with you that we need to focus on that. But I would like to disagree with you on the approach. I don't think we should be focusing on getting money to youth so that youth can run for elections. I think we should be focusing on getting money out of politics. So that is where I think young people should organize, we should resist, and in an organized way approach this problem of corruption and make sure the youth vote or the young people voting, but also young people running for office are on a base, doing that based on a set of standards and principles. But also just to add a little bit more in terms of an example, here in the United States, in the last midterm elections, 82% of young people participated in elections and in voting, and that was a massive increase from the past years. And this participation of young people in the voting meant that the Congress became 10 years younger than the previous Congress. There's more women in Congress than before, and there's more diversity in the Congress than before. So this is one good example of what young people can do when we take matters to our hands and be proactive. And the other thing I want to mention is that it's not just the money factor that prevents young people from running for political office, but there are many factors to that. For an example, there are age limitations in countries that prevent young people from running for political office. My office supports a campaign called Not Too Young to Run, that is to reduce these age barriers for running for political office. For an example, in some countries, you can vote when you are 18 or 21, but you can't run for elections until you are 35 or 40 years. And this is 73% of the countries in the world right now. So we need to change that. We need to remove those structural barriers as well, legal barriers as well, so that young people can take part fully in public life. Thank you.
Gracias. Dos preguntas.
Thank you very much. I have two questions, if I may answer. We talk from our experience because our experience has shown us, and let me reiterate, I apologize if I'm redundant, but this is not a matter of time. This is a matter of ideology. Therefore, if this is a matter of ideology, it is about political will and decision. And within this political decision, yesterday, we opened and inaugurated the new director of the Plurinational Service for Women and this patriarchalization. And she had two initial tasks. one relates with teenagers and girls. We want to build a public policy that contributes to, for instance, eliminate violence against children, but also to prevent teenage pregnancy. Our numbers are very concerning on that. The second element is we'd like to contribute to generate public policy, or rather generate public policies to eliminate patriarchal societies, which would help us eliminate the gap, the wage gap. And when Bolivia decides something, we do it. This is why we now have 51% women in the assembly and local governments and in legislative instances. In terms of young people and politics, once again, for us, that is not just about coming to present something. It's what the previous speaker said. What she was talking about was already done in Bolivia. It is now in the Constitution, and we've done it. And to conclude, let me tell you, we had to, in fact, eliminate the age limits in the deliberating bodies, because before, to be a senator, you had to be 30. I couldn't have become senator nor the president of the Senate, but today you can do that as of the time you're 18. You can be elected. It's not a matter of finance or financial resources. I think it's a question of principles. It's a matter of ideology. And of course, it needs political will from our governments. We don't need financial resources if we have political structures and a state that protects the rights and political structures that promote the participation of young people.
Thank you all so much. The conversation has been very rich. It's so sad that we can't take more questions because of time. But I would just like to reiterate what Jaya said. Let it be expensive, but we will spend it if that's the investment we have to make. Thank you all so much. We have recorded the commitments that our policymakers have made, and we will share them with you all very soon.
Hi, sorry, that was really loud. But again, we just want to thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. So we wanted to thank you guys because as we walk away from today's panel, remember that this marks only one of the many conversations that are to come between girls, young women, and policymakers alike. We are counting on you, our panelists, to follow through on your commitments. Thank you to everyone and have a great rest of your day.